Not all winter days were suitable for even the hardiest of souls to play outside, that is to say nothing of the nights. What did we do back then to pass the time in the pre-television era? Myra Peabody remembers in Pastimes of Yesteryear.
Do today's young people ever wonder what mother and grandmother did in those early days before television was invented? How did they entertain themselves during their younger days? Well, to begin with, Grandma and Mother visited more. If the next-door neighbors didn't come to visit after supper, they would probably go visit the neighbors. And if they didn't feel like another visit, there were always the jigsaw puzzles. These could easily take up half the night. Finishing one of these puzzles was usually a family project, done while listening to Amos and Andy on the radio. If the puzzle should be a really big one, the best place for it was on a folding card table, so that it could be pushed aside to be worked on again the next night. This was a relaxing pastime, usually taking place in a warm, old-fashioned parlor with velvet curtains faded to a dull gray-green and ancient floors worn shiny and thin by a generation's footsteps long before. There were also the games played on boards, the great-grandparents of the many games children find today under their Christmas tree. The original one was probably Parcheesi, a very popular family game for a winter evening. Evenings preceding Christmas were often spent stringing chains of fluffy white popcorn and bright red cranberries for the Christmas tree. The tree itself was found in the spreading wooded fields near the farmhouse and cut with great gusto and joy, a task enjoyed by all. As the holiday drew closer, many would flock to the local chapel. On Christmas Eve, the church members would prepare for a visit from Santa, who always arrived by sleigh when everyone was gathered to greet him. He always had tall tales to tell about his trip, with incidents that took place getting down some of their chimneys. As a child, I marveled at the way Santa seemed to know everyone in our small community. After the holidays came the gray skies with the white snow falling. This was the time to pull the sleighs from their covered sheds, hitch up the broad-hipped gray mare, and take rides on the country roads, now heavy with snow, to visit more friends and relatives. On the way, we would marvel at the sparrow tracks, like feather stitching in the snow, the trees glittering like crystal chandeliers, while our words recorded in breath script on the icy air. Other days would be spent at the nearby ponds, now heavy with ice. For many months we had been looking forward to the skating, and now we glided like feathers being blown across the slippery glass surfaces. Later we would cut a hole in the ice in order to fish. This delicacy was taken home for supper. Even the winter night was a thing of beauty, its heaven scattered with stars. And as the cold winter faded away, and the evenings became warmer, the family would again visit neighbors, or we would get together on Saturday nights to attend the local moving picture house. We watched comedies with Mary Pickford, Harold Lloyd, and Fatty Arbuckle, or dramas with Reginald Denny and Mabel Normand. But best of all were the serials with Ruth Rowland, or The Perils of Pauline, which always left the viewer in suspense. We never failed to return the following Saturday night to see if Pearl White had been rescued from the railroad track where the villain had left her tied for the entire week. Even Jack Dempsey had a serial and boxed every week for our entertainment. As spring approached, a washed blue sky turned brilliant as it looked down upon those now raking their yards tidy and ripping weeds from their flower beds. We listened to the liquid fluting of the meadowlark and watched the hawk circling above, and on the ground, the face of a ground squirrel or the flirt of a chipmunk's stripes. In the woods, where we often explored under the dark pines and fir trees, a fairy slipper bloomed, the most delicate of wood orchids, and millions and trillions of tiny wildflowers thrust their way out of the earth as the hard, cold hand of winter lifted. With the arrival of May, seasonal baskets, complete with goodies, were hung for friends, teachers, and neighbors. In June, when the trees wore their summer tresses, and the woods in the vale were garbed in dark green gowns, we would surprise our friends again with June boxes. And in the muggy heat of July, we would venture out in the cool night to further surprise them with July horns. Soon, summer would be over. The woods now ached and sagged, crying with color, and the bumblebee made haste, since the goldenrod was fast dying. We too made haste to gather the chestnuts falling from their satin burrs, and the red apples lying in piles like jewels shining. We noted the red leaves of woodbine twining on the old stone walls, as we breathed in the fragrance of grapes and the perfume of the gentians with fringes rolled tight. As the wide gray skies darkened into a late October night, we would dress up for the long-awaited Halloween night. Costumes were not too different from those used today, but the procedure was extremely different. We would usually spend the late afternoon scooping the pulp and seeds from a round orange pumpkin. These we carried with us at night, a lighted candle inside lighting up the gruesome grinning faces we had carved to complete our handiwork. We celebrated by keeping our jack-o'-lanterns lit, trying to scare neighbors, and going from door to door impressing everyone with our homemade costumes. Tricks played in those days were quite different from those of today. We didn't consider them too serious. What difference did it make to the families if we tipped over their outhouses or redesigned their clothes hanging on their lines? And I'm sure tipping the trolleys in nearby towns off their tracks didn't inconvenience anyone. To many, Halloween was the favorite holiday of the year, observed with humorous mischief by young and old. Next came Thanksgiving, a quiet holiday spent in eating, not too different than it is today, except that the food was much cheaper. Most of it had been raised on our own farms, the turkeys, ducks, and geese being locally grown. The pumpkin pies were always baked in a deep dish granite pans, and the hot, meaty mincemeat pies, which usually sufficed for supper, were nourishing and tasty. Now we would again face the long winter months, with another Christmas ahead and all that followed. So if you ever wonder what people did for entertainment in the old days, ask an older person who remembers. You will share their many memories, when we used crushed Christmas balls for glitter, when the only wish was for a clear night to wish upon a star, when our diaries held our innermost dreams, and we made cookies on rainy days, when all the blues drifted away, and smiles invaded our mouths at the corners. Those of an older generation hold these memories deep in their souls and hearts to cherish and hold no grief. They gladly share them with living people everywhere, people who are interested in what happened yesteryear.
Beverly Baxter remembers another way we passed the long winter evenings in the clothesline taffy pull.
Long ago, people didn't have several different entertainments, but that didn't stop them from getting together to share stories and good times. One of my favorite evenings was the taffy pull. My grandparents were quite the experts at taffy pulling, and in earlier years had traveled around to county fairs and other taffy pulling contests. I would carefully watch the thermometer, and when it hit 0, I knew it was time to make clothesline taffy. We filled Grandma's old country kitchen with family and friends. Everyone stood around sipping cocoa, watching Grandma cook the taffy. The candy thermometer soon showed the correct temperature, and the magic began. We circled around them, leaving plenty of room as they began the taffy dance ritual. They met in the middle, holding one end of the taffy rope, and tossed it to switch ends. They stepped apart and tossed it, hurling it through the air. They worked and stretched it with each step. The working of the taffy limbers it into a chewy, pliable mass, rather than a hard lump no one could enjoy. Once, at the Oklahoma State Fair, I saw a machine doing this. How sad, I thought. They've taken the fun out of taffy pulling. Grandpa had been a rodeo rider and roper, but he was much fancier with that strand of taffy than he had been with any rope. As they worked the taffy, stretching it this way and that, I worried that it would come apart in the middle, but it just kept stretching in the hands of the expert. Finally, Grandpa carried the rope of taffy out in the 0-degree weather and draped it over the clothesline to harden. When it had been exposed to the cold long enough, we took the taffy to a large, wax paper-covered surface to break with a hammer. One piece was about all anyone could handle, and became so chewy in your mouth that it provided many minutes of amusement. 0-degree weather still brings the memory of taffy pulls back to me. The Lord wants our lives to remain just as that taffy. He wants to work us again and again. He desires us to remain pliable in His hands. If we allow His working of our wills and attitudes, we will be able to stand the cold, harsh environments we find ourselves in, just as the taffy hardening on the clothesline. Even if we are broken, that same flexibility can remain in our spirits. Let us remain as a piece of taffy in our Creator's hands.
Another way to have fun indoors was to have a party and dance. You didn't need some big nightclub. All you needed was a few musicians, rolled up rugs, and a living room dance floor, as Mrs. Thomas Zahno remembers in her story, House Parties.
Anyone remember the good old days of house parties during the Depression of the late 20s and early 30s? What fun we had during those depressing times. Mom, Dad, and my kid brother would play for round and square dances at house parties, weddings, etc. to keep our family going. Mom could play almost any musical instrument, accordion, piano, guitar. Dad played the violin, and my brother the drum or guitar. Mom could hear a piece of music once or twice and memorize it. They all played by ear and were in great demand in those days. I remember one lovely group of neighbors and friends who would go from one person's house on one Friday night to another house the following Friday night. They would play progressive 500 cards for a couple of hours, then have an inexpensive first prize for the high score and a comic booby prize for low score. Around 10 o'clock, the rugs would be rolled back, furniture moved around, and the dancing would begin. We had no professional caller usually, as we knew the calls and would call them as we danced, like this part, sung to the tune of Nellie Gray. Oh, it's Alaman left with the lady on the left. Give your right hand to your partner, and it's grand right and left. When you're halfway around, you promenade her home, and you all swing your darling Nellie Gray. Then there were the round dances with the foxtrots, waltzes, quadrilles, and polkas. Usually, after a 3-part square dance, the musicians would have a 5-minute break to rest up. Playing through 3 sets of square dances was strenuous, especially pulling that accordion back and forth. At midnight, there was a break for refreshments. How good the coffee would smell, since the hostess for the evening made large kettles of it with the fresh grounds tied up in a cloth bag. No luxuries in those days like 30-cup coffee makers. Everyone brought sandwiches packed in a shoebox. These were all mixed together in a variety and passed around on plates. We often sat on the floor to eat with our backs leaning against the wall for support. Children of all sizes and shapes attended these parties too. Who could afford babysitters, and who wanted them? When they couldn't stay awake any longer, they were put to bed among the pile of coats on the beds. After the midnight snack was cleared away, it was more dancing, usually until 3 o'clock. I remember my folks would usually start playing at 3 o'clock in the morning, then follow with Home Sweet Home. For this grueling evening's work, they usually received the handsome sum of $3. Everyone hated to break up the evening's fun. On more than one occasion, they would ask the folks if they would play longer. Although dead tired, they would usually agree, as it meant a few more pennies earned. Then someone at the party would pass the hat for a free-will collection of dimes, quarters, or whatever the individual families could afford. Everyone would be happy for the extra hour of enjoyment, and my parents would have another $1 or $1.25. This particular period of time I'm recalling, my parents also played every Saturday night for a different group. The Saturday night group was a more rough and ready hard cider type. Everyone usually had a good time, too, even though there were times when a couple of the fellows would have a little too much and would go outside for a black eye or a bloody nose. I was always terrified at those times, but nothing more serious ever developed out of it. Sometimes this group also would take up the extra collection for an extra hour of fun. One time, during a blizzard, my parents played until dawn. Lucky Mom could play the guitar, too, as her arms wouldn't play the accordion any longer. They arrived home as people were going to church, having had car trouble with their old Model T. Then there were the good old family parties. We were of German descent, and sometimes at a birthday, wedding, or anniversary, our parents would again be the musicians. They never had a chance to dance and enjoy themselves, but were quite amused just the same by some of the antics on the dance floor. At these parties there were often the old German folk dances requested. I remember Herr Schmidt, a dance with a partner. You would face each other, toe to toe, sort of shuffle your feet back and forth with a slight hop, then when the music changed, sort of waltz around the room until the tempo changed to the toe-to-toe part again. Then there was the Rhinelander and the Schottisch, almost like a polka. Another dance, this time with the feet going to the side and back to the tune of Ein, Zwei, Drei, Vier, then sort of waltzing around until the music went back to the 1, 2, 3, 4. There aren't many of the older people left that used to go to these parties. Isn't it strange, with all our comforts and conveniences, we can look back on those Depression days with nostalgia, even longing.
Some winter parties were just for the young folks. Hulda Hill recalls an icy night of fun with her schoolteacher and classmates in Lamplight country winter evenings.
An icy blast of air rushed in as Pa came through the door with his arms full of firewood. "Pani ovi kiini, opusti," he said to the nearest of the little boys. Jack jumped up obediently from the wooden bench where he sat at the supper table and quickly slammed the door shut. Pa spoke only the Finnish language, as did most of the older folks in our community. "You big boys must carry in more wood," he continued, "as a hard storm is rising, and already it is snowing heavily." "It is getting dark extra early," agreed Ma, as she touched a lit wooden match to the wick of the kerosene lamp. She replaced the glass chimney, then set the lamp in the middle of the supper table, where we sat eating our supper of laxluta, which is a fish in potato casserole covered with a flaky crust, buttermilk, and thick slices of homemade bread. "We can still go to Elena's to play flinch, can't we, Ma?" "She said she's going to make some fudge and let us hear Jack Armstrong on her radio, and maybe even Ted Mack's Amateur Hour," begged Hulda. "We don't have school tomorrow, so she said we can stay till 9 o'clock. Can we, Ma?" "Me hinka niet," Pa wanted to know. "They want to go to Elena's for the evening. I suppose it's all right if they take the lantern and all stay together," Ma explained. "Yeah, and the boys had better carry extra wood into her shed and haul a couple of extra pails of water for her. She'll be snowbound tomorrow," Pa went on in his own tongue. "But if it gets really stormy, start home before 9. Helen and Hulda cleared the supper table and washed and dried the dishes in the round dishpans on the work table, while Ma ran the evening's milking through the cream separator. As usual, the two little boys hung around with their enamel cups to catch the skim milk and drink it while it was still warm and frothy. It left a mustache of white around their mouths, which got them to pretending they were bearded old men. Jack stuck his hands into the pockets of his bib overalls and walked around on the tiptoes of his swampers, trying to appear taller. He spoke in a deep voice to Everett, who was pretending to roll a cigarette from an empty Bull Durham sack. "Hey, Pekka, what do you say we go and look for that coyote in the shore bush tomorrow?" Everett pulled on his make-believe cigarette, being careful not to smudge out his milky beard. "I don't know if I'll have time to go hunting tomorrow, Juka. I got them stumps to dynamite in the field, and got to check my net in the river. Got 70 suckers in there this morning. Maybe tomorrow we go." Leaving the boys to their make-believe chit-chat, we 3 older ones started pulling on our heavy coats, woolen hats, scarves, and mittens. Ma made sure Bert lit the lantern properly, then handed Helen a box of ambrosia cocoa. "Take this box of cocoa to Elena for the fudge. We borrowed some from her last week." Before she could remind us again about watching the weather, we heard the stamping of feet in the shed. In another gust of wind, in came our cousins, Vilma and Viola, and 2 neighbor girls. "How come your folks let you out in this kind of stormy weather?" asked Helen. "Oh," Vilma answered, "our father said we could sleep at Elena's and come home early tomorrow. Lena asked us today to stay the night. Yeah, and our pa said he'd come after us with the team around 9, Secret informed us. He'll give everyone a ride home then. Oh, boy, exclaimed Hulda. This is gonna be like a party. Let's go. Without further ado, the 9 of us poured out the door and down the snow steps to the path. As we walked single file to the road on the narrow footpath, we could see lights flickering from several lamp-lit windows of our neighbors. Ours was a small community of little farms, numbering less than 30 families in an area covering a scant 9 square miles. Each family raised its own small herd of cows, maybe a pig or two, and some had a handful of laying hens. But certainly most of them raised large families of tow-headed boys and girls. Our family had 10 children, and our uncle had the first 6 of an eventual 12. The village was situated on a high wooded hill overlooking Otter Lake, Otter River, and the Sturgeon River. To get to it from the north or south meant a steep climb on a narrow, winding road. One had to take a good speed with his Model A Ford or the Chevy Coupe with the rumble seat in order to make the hills, shifting down to second gear, then first, and holding one's breath till the top was reached. In winter, the road was not plowed, except when the men of the neighborhood got together 6 or 8 teams of horses. With these, they pulled a huge roller to pack the snow along the road. It made the most necessary travel possible for delivery of feed and groceries. The rest of our traveling was done on foot, or occasionally a horse-drawn sleigh. Being so isolated, we made our own fun. Summers were busy with wood-cutting, haymaking, gardening, and berrying, but evenings we got together with the neighbors at someone's house. We had a good variety of games: prisoner's base, kick the can, ante-I over, run sheep run, or baseball. Days were long, so we were often in bed when lamplighting time came. It was in the winter, like this evening, when one could just step outside and see all those dimly lit windows beckoning a warm welcome to anyone that wanted a chat over a cup of coffee or a game of checkers, Old Maid, or authors. Behind the flickering lamp in just about any home on our hill, one would find the Pa reading his native language newspaper. Ma would be busy mending or knitting in the dim light after the youngest were tucked in bed and the baby was still cooing contentedly in a homemade cradle. Ma often took time to hear the confirmation-aged teen recite and finish from the Catechism, the Creed, or the 10 Commandments. Tonight we battled the wind-driven snow on our way to our schoolteacher's house. We often gathered there of an evening where she lived with our cousin Lena from Bootjack. Elena was our cousin, teacher, counselor, 4-H club leader, program director, and chief party giver. Teachers weren't permitted to get married in those days, so she had different girl cousins come to stay with her for company. On our way, more young people joined us. First at Heikkinen's, Benhart and Sylvie. Then, as we cut through Moylanen's yard, Alma and Ilmer came out to make a goodly party. Now there was only an open field to cross, and we were soon stamping snow off our swampers in Elena's shed. "You're just in time to hear Jack Armstrong," greeted Lena. She piled our outer garments on the landing of the upstairs steps. "We just made some cocoa, so let's have a cup while we listen to the radio." The radio was turned on with a blast of static. It was a table model run on 2 large batteries and connected to an aerial and a ground wire. Soon the static stopped and we all sat quiet as mice on the leather horsehair couch, the piano bench, on chairs, and some of us on the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to present tonight's adventures of Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy," said the announcer. "For the next 30 minutes, Only the sound of the radio was heard as 17 pairs of ears listened to the exciting tale. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the evening newscast with the latest developments on our new NRA and CCC program, plus the weather forecast. Well, I don't believe any of us care to listen to that, so suppose we all pitch in and make the fudge. And how about some popcorn, too? Asked Alina. Sounds good, we all agreed. First, the boys went to carry wood into the shed, which didn't take long when 5 boys got together. Toivo, Andy, and Pavo had also come here from Shoepack Street, which we called our back road. They filled the wood boxes in the kitchen and dining rooms and split kindling and brought in 2 buckets of water from the shallow well. Back in the house again, Alina gave them a bowl of nuts left over from Christmas. You boys can crack these nuts for the fudge while we women folk do the cooking. How are you going to cool the fudge? Asked Alma. We always put ours in a snowbank, but it's so stormy now we can't. Oh, yes, we can, replied Lina. We have an empty lump sugar box to put over it. It's made of wood, so it's heavy enough not to blow away. Soon the candy was boiling on the wood stove in a heavy iron pot. After a few tries, a sample formed a ball in cold water and was pronounced done. Willing hands beat in some butter along with the chopped nuts. Who will be brave enough to go out into the cold and put this to cool in the snow? Alina asked. A chorus rose as we all volunteered, and Ilmer was elected. It won't take long to set when it is so cold outside, and now for the popcorn. Vilma and Sylvie had been busy scraping the corn off the cobs that had been hanging in the attic. We took turns shaking the popper over the fire. The air smelled wonderfully of chocolate and buttery popcorn. Jokes flew back and forth as we worked and sampled the fluffy kernels. Melted butter dripped over the 2 enormous crocks of finished popcorn, and we were ready to gather around the tables for our card games. We divided into 2 groups, and one settled down to a lively game of flinch around the kitchen table. The rest of us used the large round table in the dining room for a few hands of Arthur's. We were having so much fun the time flew by on wings. Before we knew it, Alina was saying, My goodness, only 10 more minutes before the amateur hour. Hurry and let's get the fudge in so we can eat it while the program is on. Without stopping to pull on his mackinaw, Benhart ran quickly out and brought in the platter of fudge. Just in time, and isn't this the best fudge we ever made? Sigrid exclaimed. We munched on the smooth chocolate full of walnut chunks while Ted Mack went through his weekly contestants to find a winner. We heard the usual one-man band play on his crosscut saw and washboard while he blew a tune on the harmonica. And old Grandpa played some fast numbers on a fiddle, and a 3-year-old sang on the good ship Lollipop. When it was time to choose a winner, we had a vote of our own. Most of us thought the 3-year-old was best, while Alina, Andy, and Sylvie favored the Grandpa. How they jeered and teased when the Grandpa won. Just then a knock on the door gave us to know that Waino was there with his team to give us a ride home. Quickly donning our woolies and calling our thank yous, making hurried plans for another such evening real soon, we piled into the cutter to be covered with quilts. Snow was coming down fast, while the horses' hoofs kicked back a chunk now and then. Such a wonderful ending to a perfect evening. A horse-drawn sleigh ride in the snapping cold air past the twinkling windows in our good old Lamplight country.